The rain against the window pane of the tiny, third-floor apartment was a steady, gray static. Leo Thorne, a museum archivist with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually furrowed brow, wasn't thinking about the weather. He was focused on a more contained storm, the one brewing in the silence between him and Sarah. Sarah Vance, a landscape architect who could identify the Latin name of every plant in the window box, but currently couldn't find the words to explain the tightness in her chest. She stood at the kitchen island, methodically dicing a bell pepper, the thump-thump-thump of the knife the only conversation happening. Leo watched her shoulders, tense beneath her worn linen shirt. He'd bought flowers, peonies, her favorite, but they sat in their crinkling wrap on the entryway table, already feeling like a relic of a misdiagnosed problem. "Sarah," he began, his voice too loud for the humid, rain-soaked air between them. "Please, talk to me. Is it the trip I canceled? The fact I forgot to call the plumber? Just tell me what you want me to do." Sarah set the knife down with a precise finality. She didn't look at him, but at her own hands, green pepper seeds clinging to her skin. "It's not about the trip, Leo. It's never about the specific thing." This was the chasm. Leo lived in the kingdom of specific things, fixable, actionable items. Sarah was drowning in the ocean of everything else, the unsaid, the unfelt, the atmosphere he seemed utterly blind to. What did she secretly want? In that moment, it wasn't the peonies. It was for him to see the pepper seeds on her fingers and understand they felt like the scattered, unresolved pieces of her day. It was for him to move the flowers from the impersonal table to the small, wobbly stool she used when tying her hiking boots, a place of intention. She wanted him to perceive the world not as a series of problems to be solved, but as a shared, sensory experience to be navigated. She wanted his attention, not his solutions. But how do you ask for perception? How do you demand someone see you, truly see the quiet landscape of your heart, without drawing them a map that would, in the drawing, invalidate the entire need? She finally looked up, and her eyes, the color of wet slate, held not anger but a profound exhaustion. Leo felt a cold spike of panic. This wasn't a fight. This was something quieter and far more dangerous. He had a doctorate in deciphering ancient, faded scripts, but the living woman 6 feet away from him was an utterly foreign text. The silence stretched, filled only by the arrhythmic dripping of a leaky faucet Leo had, in fact, promised to fix. He took a step toward the kitchen, his socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. He was a man built for careful handling, for wearing white cotton gloves and using soft brushes to uncover hidden details. Yet with Sarah, he always felt like he was wearing workman's boots in a delicate ecosystem. "If it's not the specific thing," Leo said, forcing his voice into the calm, analytical tone he used when examining a fragile parchment, "then what is the category? Help me understand the category." He gestured vaguely, a historian lost in his own timeline. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped Sarah's lips. To Leo, it was a sound of exasperation. But if he had been an archaeologist of her, he would have identified its layers. The topsoil of frustration, beneath it a stratum of loneliness, and at the very bedrock, a yearning so old it felt primordial. She walked to the window, tracing a path through the condensation. "Do you remember," she said, her voice barely louder than the rain, "when we first moved in and we found that old robin's nest tucked in the fire escape?" Leo blinked, thrown off course. "Yes, it was decomposing. I disposed of it while you were at work. It was a biohazard." He remembered being proud of his proactive efficiency. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. "I wanted to show it to you. I wanted us to look at the way it was woven, the scraps of blue thread and newspaper in there. I wanted to wonder about the birds that built it." She turned to him, her gaze direct now. "You saw a problem to remove. I saw a story to share. That's the category, Leo. You are living in a world of tasks. I am living in a world of experiences, and I want you in here with me." The revelation landed on him not as a lightning bolt, but as a slow, dawning chill. His mental checklist, flowers done, apologize for trip done, ask for parameters done, was not just useless, it was the wrong language entirely. She wasn't issuing a work order. She was offering an invitation. The secret wasn't a hidden list of desires, it was a plea for a shift in consciousness. She wanted his curiosity, not just his competency, his presence, not just his labor. He looked at the peonies on the table. A task completed. He saw the empty stool where she sat each morning, a place of her ritual. Slowly, deliberately, he walked over, picked up the bouquet, and placed it on the seat of the stool. It was a small, clumsy translation of a feeling he was just beginning to comprehend. Sarah watched him move the flowers. The simple, unscripted act was a punctuation mark in their weary dialogue. It wasn't an apology. It was an observation, finally. He had seen the stool, had connected it to her. A tiny, frozen knot in her chest began to loosen. Leo remained by the stool, his hands now empty, unsure what to do with them. The archivist in him was frantically scanning the new, bewildering text. World of experiences. In here with me. The directives were terrifyingly vague. What does that look like, Sarah? He asked, abandoning his professor's tone for something softer, genuinely curious. Right now, what does being in here look like right now? She almost smiled. It was the first right question he'd asked in weeks. She nodded toward the window. It looks like coming over here and telling me what you see. He crossed the room, standing beside her but not touching. He followed her gaze out into the damp, early evening. I see rain, the brick wall of the building next door. A flickering neon sign from the diner 2 blocks away that says eat. He was listing facts, inventorying. Old habits died hard. Okay, she said, her shoulder now almost brushing his arm. Now tell me what you feel when you look at it. Leo was silent for a long moment. He wasn't a man who casually shared feelings, especially about cityscapes. He parsed them, but he tried. He let the visual data wash over him without categorizing it. It feels lonely, he ventured, surprising himself. The way that neon buzzes in the rain, it feels like the whole city is sighing, and it feels quiet in a way that's not peaceful but waiting. He glanced at her, vulnerable. Is that what you mean? Sarah's eyes were bright. She didn't look at him, but out the window, seeing it anew through his words. Yes, she whispered. That's exactly it. The secret layer, too. She didn't just want him to see her world, she wanted to see his. She wanted access to his inner landscape, the uncurated, unoptimized thoughts. She wanted the poetry he kept locked in the archives of his practicality. He risked a question of his own, a shy foray into her territory. What do you feel when you look at it? She leaned her head slightly toward his. I feel like the rain is washing something clean. I feel like that flickering sign is a heartbeat, and I feel less alone now that you're here, seeing it with me. She finally turned her head, and their eyes met in the rain-streaked reflection of the window. The space between them was no longer a chasm, but a bridge made of shared perception, fragile and new. The shared silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty. It was humming with the low-frequency understanding they had just woven. Leo, emboldened, let his pinky finger brush against hers where their hands rested on the cool windowsill. It was a question. Sarah answered by linking her pinky with his, a tiny, anchoring connection. The nest, Leo said softly, the memory returning to him with new, painful clarity. You said there was blue thread in it. MHMM, Sarah murmured, a small sound of acknowledgement and encouragement. I'm sorry I threw it away. This apology was different. It wasn't for the forgotten task or the canceled plan. It was for the lost story, for the unshared wonder. It was an apology for his blindness. I know, she said, forgiving him for that old, small thing because he finally understood its size. He took a breath, diving deeper into this unfamiliar, experiential space. When I was cataloging a collection of 18th-century love letters last month, he began, his voice finding the rhythm of a storyteller, not a lecturer. The ink was faded, but on one of them, the writer had pressed a sprig of lavender. It was dust, just a ghost of purple on the page. But in the margin, he'd written, "This smelled like the garden where I first dared to hope for you." Leo paused, feeling strangely exposed. I didn't put that in the official catalog entry. It wasn't professionally relevant, but I thought of it, and I thought of you. Sarah turned fully to him now, her eyes wide and shimmering. This was the secret, layer 3. She wanted to be his muse, not his manager. She wanted to be the reference point for his softness, the inspiration for the private, uncatalogued thoughts he deemed unprofessional. She wanted to be the lavender in the margin of his official life. He had given her a fragment of his inner world, a fragile, preserved piece of beauty he'd observed and privately connected to her. It was worth 1,000 fixed faucets or a dozen bouquets of peonies. It was proof she lived in his mind in a way that was romantic, not logistical. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, she said, her voice thick. He saw the pepper seeds still stuck to the side of her thumb. This time, instead of ignoring them or wondering why she hadn't washed them off, he understood. They were evidence of her labor, of the meal she was making for them in the midst of their disconnect. Gently, he took her hand and led her to the sink. He turned on the warm water and, with a tenderness usually reserved for century-old paper, washed the tiny seeds from her skin. It wasn't a solution. It was a sacrament, an acknowledgement of her effort, an intimate caretaking of the person, not the problem. The water ran over their linked fingers, warm and real. Sarah watched his face, the intense focus he usually reserved for fragile manuscripts now directed at her hand. The last of the resistance in her melted away. He was learning the language, translating his care from the realm of function to the realm of feeling. Later, they ate the chopped pepper stir-fry at the small table by the window, the rain a gentle soundtrack. The conversation meandered, not about chores or plans or logistics, but about the melancholic neon sign, about the lavender in the letter, about whether the rain would help or hurt the struggling Clematis on the fire escape. Leo listened, truly listened, not to respond or fix, but to collect the details of her perspective like precious specimens. He found he liked the world from this vantage point. It was richer, more nuanced. As they cleared the plates, his shoulder brushed hers. A simple, domestic accident, but this time he didn't move away with a mumbled sorry. He paused, setting the plates down. The air between them changed, charged with a new kind of awareness. The emotional bridge they'd built now hummed with a physical electricity. "Sarah," he said, her name a soft exhale. He didn't follow it with a question or a statement. He simply cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the arches of her cheekbones. His touch was a question, a continuation of the conversation they'd been having all evening. "Is this the kind of attention you need? Is this being in here with you?" She answered by leaning into his palms, her eyes closing. The secret, the final core layer was this. Beyond perception, beyond shared wonder, beyond being his muse, she wanted to be desired in this specific, conscious way. Not as a habit, not as a nightly routine, but as a chosen, present-moment discovery. She wanted to be the landscape he actively explored, not the familiar territory he simply passed through. His kiss, when it came, was slow. It was not a prelude to something else. It was the event itself. It was an exploration, a tasting of the moment, the faint hint of ginger from dinner, the cool dampness still clinging to her skin from the window, the soft sigh of relief she breathed into him. It was a kiss that said, "I am here. Not in my head with my lists, but here, with you, in this rainy, neon-lit, pepper-scented now." And in that kiss, Sarah found everything she'd secretly wanted. Not a grand gesture, but a profound shift. He was no longer just her partner. He had become a witness to her life, a collaborator in their shared atmosphere, and now, a lover rediscovering her, detail by exquisite detail. The story of their evening, from tense silence to this deep, resonant connection, was one that would never need to be catalogued in an archive. It was written in the very air they breathed, in the quiet understanding that now stretched between them, wider and more solid than any silence that had come before.